Okay, so welcome again, because I already welcomed everybody and then I forgot to start the recording. So today we're going to finish off muscle physiology. We're kind of ahead of schedule, which is a really good thing. On Friday, we will start with the nervous system. So make sure you download chapter 11 question or notes so that you have those with you. And then we will be right on time for having our test a week from Friday. So our exam will be, for test number 4, will be still on the 10th of April. And so no April Fool's jokes or anything like that. That's really when things are going to happen. And I'm going to put an announcement in, but President Haney told us in a meeting yesterday that we are still going to have our scheduled April blood drive that we always have at the beginning of April. So it will be April the 9th. Oh, I have to change my calendar. So a week from tomorrow. And the Red Cross is in desperate need of blood with social distancing. Of course, not as many people are donating blood like usual, and the Red Cross has assured us that they will take all precautions necessary to ensure that your blood donation will be taken in a very safe and contaminant-free manner. So that'll be at the Activity Center, April the 9th. You'll get the 10 points of extra credit if you go and do that. I believe it's from 10 to 5. You will probably want to call the Red Cross and schedule an appointment if you are interested in doing that service for us. We would greatly appreciate that. Eastern Arizona College blood drive is always one of the biggest in the state. And we just have great support. And so we want to continue supporting the American Red Cross in this manner. All right, so before I get all emotional. All right, so we're gonna finish off, muscle physiology today. I posted an announcement shortly ago, so maybe you didn't notice it, but there's a, how do I do this so that it shows up? It always becomes, there it is, we'll put it on my face. All right, so this is muscle fiber chart. I'm gonna have it up. If you don't have it downloaded now, you'll want to make sure that you get yourself a copy of that and watch this section of the video again where we cover this, so you can add any notes to it that you might want to make. Okay, so we're going to get in to our meeting. I'm going to show you a video really quickly that I typically would show you. I have a much cleaner copy of it because I had the actual CD or DVD, but this was the best I could do under the circumstances. But it's really important because it gives us some good things to talk about in just as soon as it's over. So let me share my screen. And as soon as it wants to do that. Okay, there we go. And get rid of me. All right, here we go.
We have incredible strength inside, far more than we know. A normal person can move as much as this guy, but only in a crisis. Pinned beneath a 1,200-pound rock, sliding toward a cliff and certain death, the climber finds power in his muscles far beyond normal limits. Sandia Mountains in New Mexico test many climbers. Their granite faces are notoriously unstable. A little steep there. Mark was in front, and I lost my footing just a little, and and by instinct to catch myself, I reached over and put my hands on the wall. And that's when all hell broke loose. The wall essentially came up in my hands. This thing was huge. And how it could crush him to death, I don't know. But I just watched him and couldn't believe he was actually still alive. The box slab has strapped Sinjin. It could crush his wrist, but with his arm muscles, he's able to hold it off. But only just. Worse, he's on a sloping ledge, sliding toward a high cliff and doom. He's stunned and in shock, but his body has gone into overdrive. Sinjin's survival depends on what's locked in the muscles of his arms, chest, and shoulders.
Oh, whoops. Oh, I shouldn't have tried to group chat you. Hang on. Let's take it to where we were.
Sinjin, the boulder, weighed 1,200 pounds. One
Okay.
at the same time. The resulting power was so great, he risked ripping muscle from bone. But in a flash instinct, Sinjin's brain made a life-saving decision, triggering every single fiber in his arm and shoulder muscles. Together, they fired in one violent push.
Most people can't consciously or voluntarily make their muscles do that. It usually requires some unique situation. Emergency is a perfect example of a situation where you need a great amount of force. Your body synchronizes instantaneously and you get this huge burst.
That power carries to close. In saving his own life, Sinjin severely hurt his arm muscles. With the level of pain that I was realizing that I was in, there was blood everywhere. Things were ugly. You're not going anywhere, right? But he survived. We carry awe-inspiring strength in our muscles that we can summon when pushed to the limits. But every day, every hour, our bones have to handle huge forces.
Okay, that's all I'm going to show you for now because it's that quality is really poor. Let me go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to put down in the chat where you can find this because you can find it online. So I'm just going to type that in. It's called Human Body Pushing, spell pushing right, pushing the limits, and then it's the strength one. So you can YouTube that, or that's where I strength. Okay. And so you can watch that on your own. So here's the situation that he was in. So he was in just an incredible flight or fight situation where he needed to exert a lot of force. Just like sometimes you'll hear about people who can lift their car off of their kid when they back over it, or just a whole lot of force all at the same time. So how is that even possible? Well, your brain is never going to take you to tetanus. It's never going to get all the muscle fibers, it's never going to get all the muscle fibers firing at the same time because it needs to keep something back in case you need just a little bit more next. Or like it said in the video, that you risk ripping muscle from bone because you really can exert that much force. And so when you're in sympathetic stimulation, there's a hormone called epinephrine. You guys know it as adrenaline. Epinephrine's job is to increase cells' permeability to calcium. And so what happens when you have epinephrine coursing through your body and your brain sends signals to all of the motor units at the same time. There's so much calcium available that all the actin and myosin can bind and slide and exert a force many times greater than what we can ever consciously produce. But we only do that in an emergency because we're only trying to save, we're trying to save our lives. Later on in that video, it shows a police officer who was in a wildfire situation, and the fire was coming, and he was going to check on some people in the house, and just this big wall of firestorm came at him, and he ran to his car, and he says, I've never run that fast in my life. And so when we're in those situations, our muscles can do two things. They can exert a tremendous amount of force, or they can move us very, very quickly. And so we're going to look at how that happens today. I just want to read you something really quickly. Usually when we can watch that video together and we see, all that happened to him, it's, like, wow, how can you move a 1,200-pound boulder? And so one year when we were watching it, my students said, well, we wonder what happened to him afterwards. How did he get better, and how long did it take, and everything? So after class that day, then I was like, I think I'll just see if I can't find this guy, because he has a really unique name. So I Googled him. So this was in October of 2008. So I Googled him and I found him, and because I also knew that he was in New Mexico from the video, and so I found his email address, and I emailed him, and this is what I emailed him. I said, Mr. Eberly, sorry to intrude on your privacy, but I am an anatomy and physiology instructor at a college in Arizona, and I just showed your clip to my class today while we were discussing muscle physiology. Some of my students were interested in what damage you ended up having and how long it took you to heal. I understand if you don't reply, but my students were very concerned about what happened to you. Thanks for your time. So that was Wednesday, October 22nd, 2008 at 1:57 p.m. I come to work the next morning, and here's an email from Sinjin Eberly on Thursday, October 23rd at 7:20 a.m. And he says, good morning, Mrs. Gillespie. Thanks for your email. I'd be happy to help out your class. From what you probably saw in the show, my left hand was pretty mangled with injuries from the crushing motion of the boulder. All the fingers on my left hand took the full force of the rock from above, so I had 9 breaks in my pinky ring and middle finger, a break in my index finger, and extensive nerve and ligament damage throughout. My ring and index fingers were degloved, so all the skin was pulled off from the big joint all the way down to the fingernails, and the wounds were packed with dirt. Those 2 fingers were physically broken sideways, so they crossed each other like an X. My index finger was broken just below the last joint. I also had a boxer's break in my right hand. The theory here is that the force that I used to push the rock broke that bone, since there really was no other impact measures to that hand to speak of. I had extensive bruising and compression injury to my right bicep muscle, also being attributed to the force used to push the rock off. My right leg was filleted open with about a 10-inch cut to the bone down my right shin. That was cool because I could see all the muscles in the meniscus move if I moved my foot. That scar is still pretty noticeable today. A good amount of nerve damage there that still affects me today. I had a number of whiplash-related injuries to my neck and upper shoulders and considerable lacerations on my neck and head, but also pretty much everywhere that was exposed I was being dragged down the slope. I was in the hospital for 3 days after the accident. Because I was the president of the mountain rescue team and pretty well known in the Albuquerque area, there were a team of doctors waiting at the ER for me to arrive. I was pretty much rushed into the CT scanner and had a bunch of images taken. Then they went to work cleaning out all the soil from my open wounds. Their biggest concern was infection, especially anthrax from the soil, so they had to get that out. They actually had a car wash type disinfectant room where they sprayed disinfectant into everywhere. Then they spent about 2 hours picking pebbles and soil that was ground into my ligaments and muscles in my fingers out with little picks. That was not fun. I had about 3 hours of microsurgery that night on my left hand. They were going to amputate my fingers, but decided to give it a shot and see if we could keep the infection down before amputating. I'm pretty happy with that decision. The break in my right hand and the compression injury in my right bicep kind of worked itself out, I guess. I had like 50 stitches in the front of my right leg. All that stuff just had to heal, but there was a ton of dirt in my right leg, so they were worried about infection there as well. I had physical therapy on my left hand mostly for about 5 months, 2 times a week. I still do not have full range of motion in the fingers on my left hand, and the overall strength of those fingers is weaker than normal, but clearly I can still type. Rock climbing as a sport is pretty much out since I don't have great strength or dexterity in that hand, and the strength in my right hand is also diminished. Ironically, when the weather moves in, it's my right hand that hurts. That boxer's break really aches when the weather systems are changing. The gash on my right shin is still sensitive, but healed pretty much, I guess. Thank you for your interest. It's an intriguing story. Give a big hello to your student, Sinjin. So I thought that was really awesome of him to take that time to write back to me and let me know what happened with him. All right, so we did Trepa, but I want to do something really quick with tetanus. Okay, so let's remember, oops, I went the wrong way with tetanus. Where is that? Oh, heavens, where's tetanus? It's in here somewhere. Okay, so where is my tetanus notes? So we know, we've already talked about this in lab. Sorry to keep going. Oh, here it is. Okay, so here is tetanus when all the muscle fibers are contracted all at the same time. And so there are two ways that we can get to tetanus. We can get to tetanus either through stimulating the muscle very, very rapidly, is what his brain was doing as well. But then his brain was also doing multiple motor unit summation and contracting all of those fibers, calling on every single fiber that he had and then stimulating them quickly so they didn't have any time to relax in between. So you can get to tetanus both with wave summation and multiple motor unit summation. But there is also one other way that you can get to tetanus, which I'm gonna show you. Oh, I don't know why I'm doing that really quickly. So let me get to, let's see, we'll go to here, share. Okay, and then I want to show you this picture because you've all heard about getting the disease tetanus, getting a tetanus shot. Okay, so why do we want to have a tetanus shot? Well, this picture, we'll do this one. Let's see if we can make it big. Oh, it may make me sign into this. Let's see. Well, let me get out of there. Let me go to a different one. Okay, so if we look at, okay, well, you can probably see this picture good enough over here. So what is this a picture of? This is a person who was infected with the tetanus organism, so Clostridium tetani. And what happened in his case, he was in a battle and he received a wound that got infected with the Clostridium organism. Now, the situation with Clostridium is that it does not live in the presence of oxygen. And so when it gets in your tissues, like in a puncture wound, because we always say, hey, you know, if you step on a rusty nail, make sure that you have a tetanus shot, has nothing to do with the fact that the nail is rusty. It has everything to do with the fact that the nail may have Clostridium spores on it, and it's a puncture wound, and it's driven deep into your skin to the point where there isn't much oxygen, so the organism will begin to grow and it'll produce the tetanus toxin. So the tetanus toxin is going to go to the neuromuscular junction of all of your muscles, and then the strongest muscle groups are the ones that are going to produce the actions that we see here. So if we think about, you know, which things are stronger, is flexion in our arms stronger than extension? Absolutely. What do we want to be? Do we want to be bent over or straight up? Well, we want to be straight up and even arched. Are our legs extended or flexed? They're absolutely extended. Extension is much stronger than flexion in our legs. And flexion of our toes, because we have to push off of the ground as we walk. And so so this man is experiencing tetanus in all of his muscles, but then we see the ones that are strongest, the strongest groups are the ones that are producing this. It's extremely painful. My husband's grandmother died of tetanus, and I would hate for that because in these tetanic contractions, it can actually rip muscle from bone. And and then you die of respiratory arrest because your diaphragm is a skeletal muscle, that the diaphragm will contract and go into tetany, and then you can't exhale and breathe in again, and then that's how you're going to die. Here is a picture of a little boy with tetanus. We can look at other people. So this is not because he's crying, but that grimace face is because the facial muscles are contracting as well. So please go and get your tetanus shot. Please be immunized against tetanus, because it's not something that anybody wants to have to go through. Okay, so let's go back to our PowerPoint and all right, and finish this off and then look at the chart that, oh, dang it, chart that I want you to see today. Okay, so we've been through all of this. We did Trepa. Okay, tonus. Okay, so we want to talk about muscle tone today. So I think we mentioned this in lab before, is that your skeletal muscles are always partially contracted. And that's because you are sending stimuli from your spinal cord, reflexive stimuli from your spinal cord out to your muscles, and you're contracting a few motor units at a time. Because if you keep those motor units contracting and then relaxing, contracting, relaxing, so you're just getting them to twitch, but you're doing so few at a time that you don't really notice them in your muscle. But the reason why we want to do this is, is because it keeps the muscles firm, healthy, and ready to respond to stimulation, as well as stabilizing our joints and maintaining our posture. If a person has like a spinal cord injury, you might have been aware of the fact that their muscles will atrophy, they'll shrivel up, the body will start consuming the proteins within them, and they'll also get contractures. So you may have seen like a person that's a quadriplegic, their fingers are all curled up in a closed fist, that they're not extended, because those muscles are not getting the signals to overcome the shortening of their tendons, and then the contractures happen. Okay, so without muscle tonus, the muscles become flaccid and atrophy. And Bell's palsy is an example of lack of muscle tone. I know we've done that, but I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do it again. Oops. So I'll just show you that really quick. Because I don't know that everybody's seen it. So here are some images of people with Bell's palsy. Let's get some good. Okay, so there's a good one. All right, so what's happening in all of these people is that one of their facial nerves has been paralyzed. And so the muscles that are being served by that by that nerve are not being stimulated. So this guy's right side of his face is not, the spine or the facial nerve is not working. Here he's smiling, so he's trying to contract both sides of his face. So he's sending signals to both nerves, but the nerve on his right is not working, just on here on his left. So if we look at here, the facial nerve that controls the muscles of the face, in this case, you can see is making her, smile and give tone to the muscles. Otherwise, everything just sags. So difficulty closing eye and drooping eyelid, drooping mouth with difficulty closing and drinking. We had an instructor here a few years ago that had Bell's palsy while he was working, and he always had to carry a Kleenex or a paper towel or a napkin with him, because he was always drooling out the side of his face, that he really hated that. So that's Bell's palsy. And it comes without warning and it goes away without warning. And it's just a weird thing. Okay, so let's finish off our PowerPoint and then we'll go into that chart that we need to look at today. All right, so in order to get energy to our muscles, we need ATP. Obviously for cross-bridge movement and detachment, and also to fuel the calcium pump, to pump the calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum after we're done. So there are 3 ways that we can make energy, make ATP for for muscle contraction. So the first one is using a molecule right here called creatine phosphate. And creatine phosphate is just a molecule that has a phosphate group on it. And you know that when our muscle cells are using ATP, that they're going to break it down into ADP. We need another phosphate. So we need another phosphate really quickly available to latch back on to the ADP to make ATP again. So creatine phosphate is going to supply that. And so for every creatine phosphate molecule that we have, we can make 1 ATP. So it doesn't require any oxygen, but we only have enough creatine in our muscles if we're going to use that as our only energy source to last for about 15 seconds. So we're gonna use that at the beginning, and then it's going to take a little bit to get in and use our regular ATP, because we don't store ATP. So just whatever's made initially, then you know we kind of have a lag period waiting for the other to get made. But if we're not moving very quickly, if we're not producing a lot of force, then it doesn't matter. So this is only going to be in times when we need, you know, that last little, that bit of energy. Okay. Then the second way that we can do this, and this is one that you guys are primarily familiar with, is anaerobic respiration or lactic acid fermentation. Because it's anaerobic, it does not use oxygen. So we're going to take glucose as our energy source, and we're going to break it down through a process called glycolysis, and we're going to get 2 ATP and a pyruvic acid. That pyruvic acid will be changed to lactic acid, and then it will be released into the bloodstream. Now, the lactic acid you're probably familiar with is what can make you sore, but there's a misnomer as far as, oh, I'm sore because of lactic acid. No, maybe in the first half hour, because lactic acid will stick around in your muscles for about a half an hour or so after exercise. But if it's the next day, nope, there's no lactic acid left. It all drained out of your muscle. The reason why you're sore is because whatever activity you just did tore muscle fibers. So myofibrils were damaged. The epimysium, paramysium, endomysium were damaged. And so that has to be repaired. But that's where the pain's going to come from, you guys, and not from lactic acid. So the energy source is glucose. We don't use oxygen. Hey, we doubled the ATP that we got made. So we were only making 1 ATP here. Now we make 2 ATP. But we can only use, we only use lactic acid if we're going to do an activity that lasts between 30 and 60 seconds. So start-stop kinds of things, or you know, high intensity like sprinting or weightlifting. Those kinds of things we'll definitely be doing anaerobic respiration with. But then the muscles need lots and lots and lots and lots of ATP, and usually we don't need it in a big force, and we don't need it immediately. So we're going to do it through aerobic respiration. And this is just regular cellular respiration. We're going to take glucose and oxygen, and we're going to make pyruvic acid out of it, and then we're going to run it through the electron transport chain in the mitochondria and the Krebs cycle, and we're going to get carbon dioxide and water. But look at that. We're going to get 36 ATP from a single molecule of glucose. This is what we want to do. So we get 36 ATP, CO2, and water that we're going to get rid of. But how long can we use that for? All day long, every day. Okay, so this is what we want to do. We can also use fatty acids and amino acids to drive this besides glucose, and we'll talk about this next semester when it's appropriate. So I'll just let you know, we'll talk more about it next semester. All right, so here are just the notes on that. Muscle metabolism, so creatine phosphate, almost instant transfer of energy in a phosphate group from creatine phosphate to ADP. Cells store more CP than ATP. Supplies last 10 or 15 seconds, used in a surge of force. Anaerobic respiration, like I said, so you can read through that again. And then aerobic respiration requires a continuous delivery of oxygen and nutrient fuels, but lasts for hours and hours and hours. And I don't know what this slide was. Okay, so this shows us where we're going to use what energy we're going to use. So the ATP stored in the muscles first, because remember, we don't have very much. So even if we're Usain Bolt, we still have to get some more energy because we're not, you know, running 100 meters in 6 seconds. So we'll use some ATP. Then in the next 10-second period is when we're going to use creatine phosphate. Okay. And then 30 to 40 seconds, if we're not done with the exercise, then we will do anaerobic respiration, and then we're done. So this is a short duration, high intensity exercise. That's what we're going to use and when we're going to use it. Our prolonged exercise, we're just ATP generated by aerobic pathway, and we can run and run and run and run our little hearts out for a long, long time. Okay, so in this, we're going to get to fatigue a lot faster than this. I mean, you've got to be running for a really super long time before you're going to fatigue in a, like a marathon kind of thing. But if you're sprinting, you can't sprint, you know, you can't sprint a mile. They are running pretty dang fast, but it's not an all-out sprint. It's a different means of running and than what you would do if you were just doing 100 meters. And that's because we run out of ATP. So muscle fatigue, there's two kinds of muscle fatigue. The first one, well, by definition, fatigue is the state of the physiological inability to contract even though the stimuli may be present. Okay, so we got two kinds. We've got psychological fatigue and physiological fatigue. Psychological fatigue is when you think you can't contract your muscles anymore. And you'd be surprised at what you can do when you really have to do it. And so your brain just says, hey, I want to do the least amount of work possible. So I'm going to tire out and not contract you anymore. But if you keep doing it and doing it and doing it, you get used to it. Your body hasn't changed its ability to do it. Your brain has changed its ability to do it. And so we can change this psychological fatigue very easily. I remember when I first started running, I was in my 40s when I started running, and I, growing up, man, I hated to run. It was just gross and everything, and running a mile in PE was just the worst. And so I never ran until I was in my 40s, and then I got on this exercise kick thing and needed something to do on Sundays, and when I couldn't just, you know, go to the gym or whatever, and so I started running on those times when I just needed to exercise, had that mental thing where I needed to exercise, but didn't have the chance or the means or whatever. And so I just, you know, put on my running shoes and I would go run a couple, 3 miles, and I was like, holy cow, I've never done this before in my life. How is this even possible? And then I got sick when I was 50. I got mono, and that just really kicked it in me, and I just haven't been able to get back since. And I really don't care. You know, I'm too old to run now. I don't really want to run. So I'm back to where I was before for physiological or psychological fatigue. So anyway, physiological fatigue is just when we absolutely run out of ATP, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so when we use up this oxygen, there are different places that we have it in our bodies. It's stored within our muscles as glycogen, or not as glycogen, as myoglobin. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you've probably noticed after you've exercised that you're breathing heavy because of two reasons. One, you need to get rid of the CO2 that you produced because it's going to make your body too acidic. But then at the same time, we borrowed oxygen from other sources during exertion, and we must replace it by breathing rapidly and deeply after exercise. Okay. And so then what if we really truly run out of ATP? What's going to happen? If the stimulus is still present, then we get a physiological contraction or a cramp. So this is a state of continuous contraction when no ATP is available and the cross bridges cannot detach. So you've got somebody running along. A lot of times in a sprint, somebody will, you know, just be all out running for the 100 meters, and then they'll get to the end of the race, and then they'll all of a sudden grab their hamstring and fall to the ground because they got a cramp. And And so why was that? Well, they just used up all their ATP, and the myosin heads could not detach from the actin, and the muscle stayed contracted until finally there enough ATP will come in and stop that. And so usually if you can get the muscle to move, or you massage it, you know, drinking pickle juice or sucking on a ketchup, or, you know, whatever people do, not really. We just need to get the blood flow to the area. So maybe if you get a cramp in your calf in the middle of the night, if you can, you know, flex, dorsiflex and plantar flex your foot to get the blood flowing, that will help, you know, get the cramp out of there. But what happens when we die? If muscles are contracted in death, there's no more ATP, and so you'll get rigor mortis. And rigor mortis usually sets in about 24 hours after death, and then, well, within a few hours after death, actually, and then it's usually gone by 24 to 36 hours. We can use rigor mortis to help us pinpoint a time of death by, you know, looking at how much rigor there is in the decedent. And so anyway, so rigor mortis is lack of ATP after death. A cramp or physiological contracture is a lack of ATP during life. Okay, so here's the last thing that we're going to take a look at is the chart. So I'm going to pull up the chart in a minute and kind of write stuff on it. But here's the basis behind the chart is the velocity and duration of contraction and the strength of contraction are determined by 3 different muscle fiber types. So within our skeletal muscle, there are 3 different types of cells that have unique characteristics to give us, in addition to just wave summation, multiple motor unit summation, it gives us the ability to produce a lot of different force, different dexterity, different speeds, based on the kinds of muscle fibers that are being stimulated or being recruited. So, so our muscles contain a mixture of 3 fiber types that determine the velocity and duration of contraction. And also muscle fibers contain varying amounts of something like myoglobin, which stores oxygen in muscles, and myosin ATPase, which is what breaks down the ATP in the myosin head so that it can move back and forth. So we have our notes here. So those are about the 3 different fiber types. And so actually right now I want to go to the chart. So if you don't have the chart, that's cool, because you'll just look at what I got and then you can do it later. And then I want to get rid of that and share that. Okay. And annotate. All right. So what we have here are the 3 muscle fiber types. So we have slow oxidative fibers, fast oxidative fibers, and fast glycolytic. And so we're going to take a look at what does it mean to be slow, what does it mean to be oxidative, and compare how we use these muscle fibers. Okay, and then that will take us to the end of our meeting today. All right, so we have some metabolic characteristics here, and then we have some structural characteristics. So we want to look at what are the different chemical processes and things that are going on between the 3 muscle fiber types. Let me just put in here slow oxidative fibers. Okay, so remember the soleus, oops, that we talked about yesterday in lab. And then this would be gastrocnemius. And there would probably be a fair number of gastrocnemius, I mean, fast glycolytic fibers in a gastrocnemius. Soleus is mostly slow oxidative. And then here we'll put extrinsic eye muscles, the ones that twitch super fast. Okay. All right. So we can kind of imagine what's going on with these muscles as much as, you know, force, but not necessarily. Let's, you know what? Let's not do the, let's not do extrinsic eye muscles. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Gastrocnemius is fine for here. Let's do Pectoralis major. Okay. Has a predominant amount of fast glycolytic fibers, and you'll see why in a minute, or before we end today. All right, so speed of contraction. So slow obviously means that they are slow twitch, and so we can say twitch. Okay, so how quickly do they twitch? They twitch slowly. So that means that you know what, let's just draw a little picture with each one. So here will be our twitches. Okay, so remember, a graph of a twitch has the latent period of contraction, period of relaxation. So that's what the graph of the slow oxidative fibers looks like. Fast oxidative would look more like that. And the fast glycolytic would be like that. Super fast, contract really quickly, relax really quickly. Okay, so obviously slow twitch fibers or slow oxidative fibers twitch slowly, gastrocnemius twitch fast, pectoralis major twitch fast. Now, what is it about them that allows them to contract and relax and contract and relax super, super quickly? Well, it depends on how much myosin ATPase they have. So in our slow oxidative fibers, they don't have a lot of ATPase. And so the ATP isn't broken down very rapidly, and so therefore you can't use the ATP very rapidly. On the other hand, the fast oxidative have more ATPase than the slow, and then the fast glycolytic have lots of ATPase, so that they're going to contract and relax super, super quickly. Okay, so if you're going to do those kinds of activities, if you're going to contract quickly and use up a lot of ATP or whatever, what kind of ATP synthesis are you going to use? So slow oxidative fibers absolutely use aerobic respiration, okay? No lactic acid production. All right, so if you're running for a long time, marathoners never complain about, lactic acid after their workout. But what about fast glycolytic? They are only going to do anaerobic glycolysis. Those fibers are only going to produce lactic acid. So we see a lot more lactic acid production in strength training activities, resistance training activities, than we see in marathon, in cardiovascular aerobic kind of activities. And then the fast oxidative, depending on the condition, they'll do some aerobic respiration primarily, but because they're oxidative, which means that, you can think of it that they're using oxygen, but they can do some glycolysis and some lactic acid. Now, keep in mind, you guys, that all of our muscles have all three fiber types. Some muscles just have a lot more of a particular type than the other. So soleus is primarily slow, pectoralis major will be primarily fast glycolytic. All right, now, if you're going to carry out aerobic respiration, you need oxygen. So guess what? Our slow oxidative fibers store oxygen in a molecule called myoglobin. Now, myoglobin sounds a lot like hemoglobin because it's the same thing. It just happens to be in your muscles. And so you've got myoglobin that sits in your muscles and provides oxygen, a ready supply of oxygen for these muscles to be able to contract. So high myoglobin in slow oxidative fibers, pretty high amount in fast oxidative fibers because they still need it. They're carrying out aerobic respiration, but very low myoglobin content in a fast glycolytic because it's carrying out anaerobic respiration, lactic acid fermentation. Okay, now the other thing that you need to make ATP besides O2 sometimes, but what you always need to make ATP is a glucose source, okay, or some kind of thing for energy. So we want glucose. And if we're going to do ATP production really, really quickly, we're going to want to have a lot of glycogen stored within our muscles. So the fast glycolytic, because they're carrying out anaerobic and you only make 2 ATP for every glucose, you need a whole bunch of glucose stored within your muscles. So fast glycolytic fibers then have lots of glycogen in them. Fast oxidative have some, but not as much as the fast glycolytic, and we don't need to store glucose in our muscles in the slow oxidative because it's being supplied by our blood vessels. Okay, so we don't need to store the glycogen in our muscles in the slow oxidative. Okay, and then how are we going to, who's going to get used first? What is our body going to use the most? Well, we're going to use the slow oxidative mostly everything we do, because nothing has to be done super fast and nothing has to be done with very few things have to be done with a lot of exertion. So we're going to use the slow oxidative fibers because they're going to always work. They're always going to have ATP. They're not going to run out. The next one that we're going to use are the fast oxidative. If we need to ramp things up, if we're going to do it a little bit faster or with a little bit more intensity, then within a muscle, we'll call on the fast oxidative fibers. But if we need even more force or speed, then we're going to call in the fast glycolytic fibers. Okay. Now, the reason why we want to do it in those orders is because the slow oxidative fibers are slow to fatigue. They're fatigue resistant. They're making ATP all the time, so they're not going to run out of ATP. Gastrocnemius are pretty intermediate in their rate of fatigue, moderately fatigue resistance, not as good as the slow oxidative, but fatigable. The fast glycolytic are very fatigable. You can do their intensity for a short period of time and then they're going to poop out because they just run out of ATP. If we're going to get a cramp in a muscle, the muscles we get cramps in are the ones that have a predominance of the fast glycolytic fibers. Okay, so what are we going to use them for? We're going to use the slow oxidative for long time. Okay, just carrying out, and you know, if we're doing kinds of activities, then running a marathon, maintaining our posture. But do it right now. You guys, you're just sitting around in your pajamas, watching me, listening to me. I'm just sitting at my desk. I'm not doing anything. So the muscles that I'm using are going to be primarily the ones with lots of slow oxidative fibers in them. I'm going to get up and walk around here in a few minutes. So then I'm going to up my exertion. So I'm going to use some fast oxidative fibers more than I will use the slow oxidative fibers. But if I need to run across the street super fast, or I need to lift something or whatever, then I'm going to use my fast glycolytic. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here because we have plenty of time on Friday to finish this off, because this is the fun part. I really like to talk about their structural characteristics, and I don't want to try to cram that in 2.5 minutes. So we're going to stop right here. If you don't have this, you'll probably want to bring it next time. And then next time, make sure that you bring your notes on chapter 11 on the nervous system in general. And that's where we're going to start after about the first 10 minutes of class next time. All right. So that's it for today, and I appreciate you coming. Does anybody have any questions before we leave? So just remember Friday at 11, and it's going to be the same ID number. So the 180-228-691, that's always going to be our room to get in. All right. Well, I don't see anybody chatting with me, so I'm just going to go ahead and we'll stop the recording, and we'll see you on Friday. Have a great next couple of days.